Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 89 of Only Human. Today, I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the flooding that occurred here in Texas this last week, what we might be able to learn from it, and just kind of give you an update of what it feels like to be here. So without going too far down the rabbit hole here, I really want to talk about what we can learn from this about preparedness, about readiness, how that translates into execution, and how we can overcome complacency in the face of, real dangers that are out there that we might get a little bit too used to. So by way of background, I live in the Texas Hill Country, about 20 miles from where the horrible flooding occurred, but only a few miles from the Medina River that also had some significant flooding. I want to describe a little bit for you the Texas Hill Country. I want to talk about the sequence of events. I want to talk about different levels of readiness and a little bit about some of the rescues that are going on and how those were conducted, and see if there's some human performance lessons we can draw out of this. And you have to realize, first of all, this is very raw and real for me. I'm still a bit in a state of shock. To give you a little bit of a glimpse inside what things were looking like here, I had family in town that were staying in an RV camp in a cabin that my daughter, her husband, and their three children, they were up well above the Medina River, and so they were safe. But we wanted to take the kids out to see fireworks on the 4th of July, which was the day of the event, or after the evening. In the evening, it was the day after. And those of you that have gone to fireworks displays before, you know how joyful it is, and people cheer after the fireworks and the grand finale and all those things. Well, the first thing we noticed is that there weren't a lot of people at the fireworks display, and usually cars are parked, down the road, and parking lots are full and all of that. There weren't a lot of people there, but then as the fireworks went up and exploded, there wasn't a lot of oohs and ahs. There wasn't a lot of clapping. The grand finale went off at the end, and people just got back in their cars and drove away. It was a solemn event, and most of us, including myself, felt guilty for being there, right? But we wanted the kids to see fireworks, so we took them. Let me describe for you, for those of you that have never been here, the Texas Hill Country, because you hear that term thrown around a lot. It's a beautiful, scenic, culturally rich region in South Central Texas, and it's known for its rugged landscapes. Texas is not known for mountainous terrain and beautiful, lush areas. Well, this is one, right? It's a unique blend of natural beauty and culture and history. It's located in South Central Texas. Like I said, Austin is probably the northern anchor, and San Antonio to the south and to the east. And it extends west and north of San Antonio toward Kerrville, where the flooding was most dramatic, but certainly not the only place. Towns like Fredericksburg, Bandera, cowboy capital of the world. It covers about 25 counties, so the hill country is pretty big. And it's characterized by rolling hills out toward the edges, and then as you get higher up into the hill country, there's limestone cliffs and something called the Balcones Escarpment, right, which is a geographical fault line that creates beautiful, steep terrain. And the elevations were not too far from the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, whichever you choose. And the elevations here range from about 1,000 to 2,500 feet, depending on how high up you go into the hill country. It's interesting because just about everywhere in the hill country has somewhere between 6 and 10 inches of topsoil and then rock, right? Hard rock. Some of it's limestone, so not so hard, but a lot of granite. And you try to drill holes for fence posts, and you better be able to break some rocks to get them down in there. As a result of that, when water hits it, it erodes the topsoil very quickly. Then it hits the rock, and it just flows. Right? Think of, pouring some water into your sink or something like that, and how quickly it just slides down to the bottom, right? So as a result of that, we have a lot of really cool things. We got clear spring-fed rivers, the Guadalupe, Blanco River, Frio River, all are down here, and they're carved into the landscape, creating these gorgeous canyons and lush ecosystems. Again, something you don't think a lot about when you think about Texas. The wildlife, the birds, the flowers, this time of year, especially when we get a little bit of rain, are amazing, right? And this time of year, all the fawns are out, a huge whitetail population down here. And it's gorgeous. It's also very dangerous. In fact, because of all the things I just told you about, the hill country has gained a nickname of Flash Flood Alley, right? Due to the rapid runoff during heavy rains. And that's just what we had here last week. It's interesting that when you live in a place that knows about flash floods, right? I mean, there's signs everywhere. Kids are taught from an early age, don't drown, turn around, climb to higher ground, all of that stuff, that you would think the response would be near immediate to the danger. But just like so many of us that operate in high-risk industries, over time, when nothing bad happens, we grow immune to it. Right? And that lowers our situational awareness quite a bit. And I think a little bit of what occurred last week can be attributed to that. The other thing that's unique about this is because floods happen so often, these rivers have these beautiful, wide floodplains. And they're gorgeous. You'll find city parks there and all kinds of other things, including, especially in this particular area, large camps, summer camps, right? And people come from all over the world to them. And when I say large, some of these camps will have 1,000 kids in them. My grandson just came back from a camp in Medina a couple of weeks ago for boys and had time of his life. A lot of memories are formed there. Thousands of children come down here every year to go to these camps. A lot of them are church camps. Some of them are other types of camps. And they're all down in this floodplain. You say, well, why would you build a camp down there? Well, because it's beautiful, right? And because it's relatively flat. And because you've got easy access to the rivers for kayaking and floating on tubes and all of those kinds of things. And the rivers are typically very slow and gentle, right? Until they're not, right? Until they're not. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities down here. Flooding is obviously the big one, right? We've seen all kinds of historical floods ranging back to the 1900s, coming all the way forward, and floods in 1987 at exactly the same place on the Guadalupe River in Kerrville led to a lot of deaths. I'm not exactly sure how many. Right now here in our neck of the woods, the number is 83 fatal and counting, with a lot of people still missing. We don't even know how many people are still missing, but they're keeping us apprised of all that. Okay? And as a result of the 1987 flood, which is the most recent big one in this area, there was all kinds of government responses to that. In fact, they were going to put sirens up and down the river in that area, and in fact did put those sirens in a few places. But over time, when the floods didn't happen, the sirens costed money, and they required upkeep, and basically they decided it wasn't worth it. Right? And so there were no early alert systems. The other thing to know about this particular event is that it happened in the dead of night, right? But there was definitely some warnings there, and pretty significant warnings. And I want to run down that timeline for you and dispel a couple of rumors that are out there. One, that the National Weather Service was understaffed because of recent cuts to federal workforce and all that. It's simply not true. These guys typically, the local National Weather Service will be staffed by only 2 people, but they saw what was happening. And what was happening was Tropical Storm Barry had come across the Mexican peninsula, gained some strength in the south, and rolled northward. Right? And if you look at time-lapse radar, you just see this churning group of thunderstorms that eventually dumps over 10 inches of rain in some areas in just a few hours, right? So National Weather Service actually had 5 people in that regional office because they expected something to happen. And they issued a flash flood watch for Kerr County, right where it happened, at 12:41 a.m. Central Time, just after midnight on Thursday night, right? And it mentioned rain amounts of 10 inches or more. And it said, and I'm quoting here, excessive runoff may result in the flooding of rivers, creeks, streams, and other low-lying flood-prone locations. Creeks and streams will likely rise out of their banks. Right? So that was a fully 6 hours before the tragedy. Less than an hour and a half later, at 1:14 a.m., they changed that to a flash flood warning, which says, it's like a tornado warning. It means it's happening. We're seeing it. Life-threatening flash flooding of creeks, streams, and rivers. Right? And then finally at 5:34, which still was a half hour before the water came up out of the banks and started sweeping away cabins and RVs and children and adults, they issued a flash flood emergency at 5:34 a.m. So there was time to prepare. Right? So why wasn't everybody on high ground? And that's kind of where I want to go with a little bit of our discussion here. Obviously, this occurred at night, right? The warnings, the watch, the warning, the emergency, they all occurred at night. But if you know you're in a flood-prone area and you know that they're predicting, weather forecasters were predicting, up to 6 inches of rain the day before this happened, shouldn't that raise some sort of alert? Right? And in some places it did. And so we've heard a lot, and this is not me casting blame, but I do want to compare 2 responses. We've heard a lot about the Mystic Ranch, where all the children, especially the young ones, suffered mass casualties, horrific tragedy. But not too far from there, there's another ranch called the Moe Ranch. And I was listening this morning and reading some materials about how they had thought at the Moe Ranch, had thought about this, and they had someone down on the river watching it. They had a meeting and talked about evacuation plans. And when the river began to rise, they executed them. And they got everybody away from the river. They got everybody up to high ground. And they suffered no casualties. The ranch was flooded just like everything else down in the floodplain, but no one died there. And you contrast that to all the RV parks that were down along the river. that should also have emergency evacuation plans and should also have states of heightened awareness, and yet didn't do those things. And I don't know, maybe they did have plans, but they certainly did not execute them. So what can we learn from just that little bit of the discussion? We can learn that when we live in an area of high risk, no matter what that risk is, whether it's tornadoes or natural disasters, wildfires, or whether it's something more human, a high crime area or whatever it is, that over time, when nothing bad happens, our vigilance erodes. Okay? And we have to recognize when our vigilance starts to erode. Whenever you go into a new area, I love the wild, and I go up every couple of years to go fishing in Alaska, and every time I go up there, I think about brown bears, right? And I carry my pepper spray and all of that. But as a newcomer there, I am extremely aware of the risk that's there. And yet I see, people that have been there all the time fishing with bear right across the river from them, and maybe even on the same side of the river. And I can tell they're keeping a watchful eye, but they're not too nervous, right? And I wonder, how do you get to that level of comfort? And is it comfort? Is it wisdom? Or is it complacency? Right? So I don't mind the fear when I go into somewhere new, because I'd rather overreact than underestimate. Right? And I think that when you live in an area that's prone to flash floods, like we do here, you can't afford to let that happen. Right? You just can't afford to let that happen. So I think as we kind of parse this a little bit and see what we can learn from it, we have to look historically, right, at what happened all the way back in 1987, almost an identical event. But in 1987, more lives were lost by vehicles driving into rushing water. It had happened a little bit differently in that it occurred, and the flooding occurred right when people were driving to work, and the visibility was low, and so there's splash coming in people's windows, and they're trying to get to work, and they're driving, and one person goes into the we have these bridges that are made out of big, huge concrete slabs, and they're meant for the water to flow over them. And the first car hits it, and you can have a car, no matter how high lift your car is, pulled off the side of one of those bridges by a foot of water. That's how strong the hydraulics are, just a foot. You may have 18 inches of clearance, but it'll hit those tires, and once you break traction, it's all over. And that was the majority of the casualties back in 1987. Interestingly and tragically, here on this one, just a couple of days ago, there was a camp that had everybody out and safe, and they decided, let's get them out of here so we can get them reunited with their parents. And they got a big train of buses going across one of those bridges, and most of them made it, but the last one stalled, and there was a van behind it, and when it stalled, it washed them into the river, and everybody that was on board has not yet been recovered. They haven't even found the bus or the van. Right? So I guess that's key point number one. We have to learn from the past. And every high-risk industry has a history we can learn from, right? Whether it's surgical teams or healthcare, where we know that 200,000 people die every year due to medical error, or whether it's aviation, where we don't have to look very far at all because all the data is at our fingertips at the NTSB websites or in various forms and training programs that have been put together that say, hey, look, these things are happening. And yet we always hear this refrain of there are no new accidents or tragedies, right? There are only replays of things that have happened before. So I guess the first thing I'd recommend is not only know what the risks are where you live, right? I live in Texas, rattlesnakes, scorpions, floods, right? I'm not only try to stay aware of them, but I try not to get complacent. Right? And then when the situation begins to change, right? Suddenly we have risk of rain, or maybe you're in a city area that the demographics are beginning to change and the crime rates are going up. Your vigilance has to change, because what's happened to you in the past may no longer reflect an adequate model of what's happening to you in the present, right? So if for no other reason, we have to stay alert, right? So I guess to bring this to a close and to pull some sort of lesson from it, I wanted to share with you just a couple of really simple things. Respect your environment, right? Know what the risks are and prepare for the worst case scenario. Right? And we get flash flood watches down here, like severe thunderstorm warnings in the Midwest, or whatever it is for your local area. Right? And when it's only a watch, it's very easy to just ignore it. Okay? And then when it gets to a warning, it means that something's happening somewhere, but gosh, it's probably not here. No, expect it to happen to you where you're at. So prepare for the worst and expect it. But that requires some forethought, right? You have to have a plan. You have to know the history. And not only do you have to have a plan, you have to practice it. Like those people at the ranch that saved all their kids. They had a plan. They talked about it. They rehearsed it, and they executed it. Okay? The next point is, don't rely on anybody else to tell you it's time to act. I think a lot of people grew up in a nanny state where, if I'm supposed to leave, they'll issue me a mandatory evacuation order. Maybe, hopefully, but don't rely on that, right? Obviously, it doesn't always work. So don't rely on anybody else, the government, the local people, your next door neighbor, your mom or your dad, to tell you it's time to act. Trust your own judgment. Sometimes it's all you have when the clock is ticking. And I want to sign off with this quote I've used once or twice before. It's from a former CIA operative named Shawnee Delaney. And she says, if you feel something's off, you're not overreacting. You're underestimating. So thanks for listening today. We're still in deep states of grief down here. People are pouring out by the thousands to help, so many so that the sheriffs are turning people away now. But we'll get through this like every locality does when they have a tragedy strike. But let's not let it happen to us. So with that, we'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.